I still remember how that house felt from the first day we moved in. Nothing looked strange physically, just an old two-story house with a long hallway upstairs. But every time I went up there, it felt like cold air was already waiting for me. On both sides of the upstairs hallway, there were long closet doors stretching like tunnels. Behind them was a dark crawl space about 30 feet long, where we used to play when I was younger. Back then, I was never afraid. But one moment changed everything. One afternoon, my friend and I decided to crawl from one side to the other with flashlights. We laughed, pushed each other, thinking nothing could happen in such a small space. But when my flashlight pointed toward the corner, I saw a little girl. She was sitting quietly, wearing a white dress, her blonde hair slightly covering her face. She looked normal, like a kid waiting to be asked to play. Not scary at all, and that was exactly what terrified me. I froze. I didn't scream. I just kept crawling behind my friend until we got out, never looking back. Once we stepped into the hallway, I finally told him what I saw. He said he didn't see anything, but for some reason, he also didn't want to go back inside. From that day on, I absolutely refused to be upstairs alone. Whenever my parents asked me to grab something from the upper floor, the closet doors would slowly open as soon as I reached the top step. Not wide, not loudly, just enough to make me feel like someone inside was peeking out. My toys often disappeared. I almost always remembered where I put them, but they still went missing. Then, suddenly, they would show up in the attic when my parents were getting Christmas decorations. Even they couldn't figure out how my toys ended up there. One morning, while my parents were still asleep, I decided to be brave. I took my small dog with me to the attic. Normally, he would chase anything that moved, but this time was different. When we reached the top of the attic stairs, he stopped completely. He refused to move forward, refused even to take a single step. He just stared into the attic, shaking a little. That was the moment I knew what I saw wasn't my imagination. But my parents never believed me. They thought everything happening was my fault. Lights left on, doors open, toys moved. I had no way to prove anything except the fear that always crept in whenever I went upstairs. When I was 10, we finally moved out. I was relieved. I thought it was the end. But the house wasn't done with me yet. Only a week after we moved out, the new owners called us. They asked, half jokingly, if the house had ever felt strange. My parents laughed, assuming it was just what people say when they move into an old house. But the next call wasn't a joke. Their daughter, who slept in the upstairs room, said she often played with a blonde girl at night. She told the story casually, like talking about a regular playmate, but the details she mentioned were exactly the same as what I saw years earlier. My dad still thought it was funny, but the new owners kept calling, and over time, their voices started sounding worried. One night, they were watching TV in the living room. Their daughter was on the floor with her toys. When they looked over, there was another little girl sitting on her lap. The girl just stared at them, silent, unmoving. After that, they started researching the house's history. They discovered that a dressmaker once lived there, along with her granddaughter. When they found an old family photo, I felt a shiver run through me. In the picture was a little girl in a white dress with blonde hair and the same face as the one I saw in the crawl space. She looked exactly the same. The new owners continued sharing what happened next. Sometimes they heard tiny footsteps upstairs when everyone was asleep. Sometimes their daughter's dolls were moved around. One night, the bedroom door opened by itself, and a small figure stood outside before disappearing. I listened to everything quietly. I felt scared, but also relieved, because what I experienced wasn't just a childhood imagination. One day, I finally asked them a question. Did the girl ever speak? There was silence on the phone for a moment, then the new owner said, "Once." She said her name was Ellie. The name felt strangely familiar, even though I couldn't remember ever hearing it, as if the name had been echoing in that house for years, waiting for someone to acknowledge it. Before hanging up, they added something that made my skin crawl. Sometimes, she appears at the top of the stairs, like she's waiting for someone to come home. I knew exactly who she was waiting for. Since then, I sometimes dream about that house. In my dreams, Ellie isn't scary. She just sits in the corner of the crawl space, holding a toy, watching me, as if making sure I haven't forgotten her. I don't know if she ever left the house, but one thing is certain. That house was never truly empty. And maybe, as long as there's a child sleeping upstairs, Ellie will always have a friend, or someone she calls home.
That night was supposed to be completely ordinary. I was sitting in my room, chatting with my girlfriend while my cheap webcam perched on top of the monitors stayed on. Its dim light made my face look pale, but I kept it on because my girlfriend always said she liked seeing my expressions while I typed. Behind me, two things were visible. On the left side of the webcam frame stood the old wooden staircase leading upstairs, and on the right side was the entrance to the living room. My house was an old Victorian home. The wooden floors groaned with every step, as if the house had its own voice, its own mood. The squeaking noises had become part of my nightly soundtrack. As usual, my little sister had fallen asleep on the living room sofa. Nothing could wake her, not even the TV blaring late-night shows. Later, sometime past midnight, she would usually wake up half-conscious and make her way upstairs to her room. While I was typing a long message to my girlfriend, something moved in the corner of the webcam screen. A figure walked out of the living room and started climbing the stairs behind me. The steps were slow and sleepy, exactly like how my sister moved when she was half awake. The height, the posture, the hair, it all looked just like her. I froze. My fingers hovered above the keyboard as I stared at the webcam feed. The figure climbed one step, then another, then vanished out of the frame. But one thing struck me so hard that chills ran straight down my spine. There was no sound. None. And those stairs were never silent. Even a cat walking on them would make noise. I tried to think logically. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention, I told myself. But my heartbeat was too fast, too loud, refusing to calm down. Without saying anything to my girlfriend, I stood up and peeked into the living room. The TV's glow lit up the room, and there on the sofa, my sister was still fast asleep. Her breathing was steady, a blanket draped over her legs. There was no way she'd been the one on the stairs. The walls felt like they were closing in as I returned to my chair. My hands were stiff when they touched the keyboard. I stared at the webcam again, almost hoping the figure would reappear so I could find some reasonable explanation. But the screen showed nothing, just my quiet, empty room. Finally, with trembling fingers, I typed to my girlfriend. "Did you see anything on my camera just now?" She replied quickly, without hesitation. "Yeah, I just saw your sister go upstairs." And at that moment, I knew, whatever I saw and whatever she saw, it wasn't my sister.
After that night, my room never felt the same. The staircase behind me seemed alive, as if it were watching me, waiting for the right moment to speak again. I tried to ignore the feeling, but it clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake off. I decided I needed proof. Something to confirm I wasn't imagining things, that my webcam wasn't glitching, that my mind wasn't playing tricks on me. The next night, I set up my phone with a recording app running silently in the background. My webcam stayed on as usual. I also told my girlfriend to keep an eye on the feed in case the figure showed up again. Around 1 in the morning, my sister stirred on the sofa and finally woke up. This time I heard everything clearly. The familiar creaking of the wooden floor, the groaning steps, the rhythm I'd heard every night for years. Normal, safe, nothing strange. She headed upstairs and disappeared into her room with no incident. But just when everything seemed ordinary, my webcam caught something. Something I can only describe as a shape. A shadowy silhouette standing at the base of the stairs, barely visible, motionless, breathless, just standing there. I froze. My body went rigid and my eyes refused to blink. The figure had no face, no hair, no features, just darkness thicker than the room around it. I typed quickly to my girlfriend. "Do you see that?" Her reply came instantly. "Yeah, who is that?" I didn't have an answer. As I rose from my chair to turn and look in person, the figure suddenly moved. Not upward or downward, but forward, straight toward the camera. Its movement didn't resemble walking, it didn't step, didn't shift its weight. It glided, silent and impossible. I stumbled backward, and in that moment, the webcam view went black. Not because it shut off, but because something was right in front of it, so close that it blocked everything. The screen showed only pitch black, and in that darkness, a soft, cold whisper brushed against my ear from behind. "I'm already here." I turned slowly, heart pounding so hard it hurt, but nothing was there. The room was empty. The stairs behind me were still and quiet. Too quiet.
From that night on, something changed. The old staircase, once full of groans and creaks, never made a sound again. Not a single squeak, not even when someone walked on it. As if the house had surrendered its voice. As if something living in the silence had taken its place.
My uncle's house, on the far eastern edge of New York, always looked as if it were holding its breath. Its wooden walls had aged, the paint peeled like scales, and every gust of wind made the windows rattle as though someone were knocking from the outside. Even so, the house was always filled with laughter, at least during the day. Every time I visited, my uncle would tell the same story about two spirits said to linger there, a loyal stableman and a maid who had worked in the house more than a century ago. Their names had long been forgotten, but the rumors of their presence clung to the house like stains time couldn't wash away. Usually we just laughed it off. If we heard footsteps in the hallway at night, we'd look at each other and say, "Oh, it's just the old wood complaining." Though, honestly, sometimes the sounds were too clear, too steady, too much like the footsteps of a real person. My uncle never seemed frightened. As a neurologist, he liked explaining everything with logic. "Your brain is playing tricks on you," he'd say. "Old houses make noises." But his smile wasn't always convincing. One weekend, my uncle invited an old friend, Miss Carter, to stay over along with her younger sister. They had visited before, but never stayed the night. That day, the sky was gray, the air damp, and the house felt stranger than usual. The dim yellow lights made everything look as if we were standing inside the first page of a mystery novel. That night, after everyone went to bed, Ms. Carter woke up to the sound of fabric brushing softly. When she opened her eyes, she saw a woman in a maid's uniform carrying a stack of towels down from the second floor. Her movements were calm, practiced, almost elegant. Ms. Carter simply smiled to herself. "Wow, Uncle really splurged on household staff," she thought. She didn't question it at all and went back to sleep. A couple of hours later, she woke again to the smell of coffee. This time, she saw the same maid walking down the stairs carrying a shiny metal percolator. The maid's gown swayed gently with each step. Strangely, her feet made no sound, not even on the creaky wooden stairs. Something about that should have felt wrong, but a sleepy mind doesn't always grasp things right away. Ms. Carter nodded politely and drifted back to sleep. Morning arrived, with pale sunlight filtering in through the window gaps, and when Miss Carter came downstairs, my uncle was sitting in the kitchen chatting casually with her sister, both sipping coffee that didn't smell nearly as rich as the one from earlier. She asked, "Where's the maid? I thought she was making breakfast." My uncle stopped mid-sip. He slowly raised an eyebrow. "The maid?" Ms. Carter laughed, then described the woman in detail. The uniform, the tidy bun, the towels, the percolator. My uncle didn't respond for several moments. Too many moments. Finally, he stood up, motioned for them to follow, and led them to the living room. He pointed at an old sepia-toned photograph hanging on the wall. In the picture stood a woman in a maid's uniform, unsmiling, her eyes staring directly ahead as if watching whoever looked at her. Miss Carter's heart dropped. "That's her," she whispered. My uncle inhaled deeply and spoke softly. "She died about 100 years ago."
After that night, the atmosphere inside the house shifted. Not because anything new happened, but because everyone suddenly noticed things they had always ignored. Like how certain corners of the house were always colder than the rest, even with the heater running. Or how the sound of footsteps upstairs always returned whenever the room fell quiet. Miss Carter sat in the living room staring at the maid's photograph, torn between curiosity and fear. "Why is she still here?" she finally asked. My uncle didn't answer right away. He walked over to the window and looked out at the backyard filled with old trees. "This house was built in the late 1800s, he explained. "Many workers lived and died here, some of old age, some from accidents. This place has a long history, maybe too long." Miss Carter's sister shivered. "You said she died 100 years ago? But
Why did she look alive last night? My uncle sighed. I don't know, but you're not the first to see her. That sentence made the air in the room feel tighter. Suddenly, the house felt as though its walls were closing in a little. That night, the three of them decided to sleep in the living room with the lights on. No one wanted to sleep upstairs after learning that the old residents were still walking around. But the fragile sense of safety didn't last long. Around 2 in the morning, the same soft sound returned, fabric brushing gently, like someone carrying laundry. Then came the footsteps, slow, steady, not threatening, but undeniably real. A faint silhouette appeared at the top of the stairs, a long gown, a neat bun. The lamplight made her look solid, but her skin was too pale, too still to belong to the living. The maid paused, as if checking whether anyone needed her help. There was no anger, no violence, only a silent presence that made every hair stand on end. Miss Carter tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. My uncle slowly raised his hand in a hesitant greeting, like someone acknowledging a guest who had overstayed her stay by a century. The maid descended the stairs. At the midpoint, her body shivered like smoke caught in a breeze. Her outline flickered and thinned until she faded completely. Silence returned. My uncle exhaled, his voice barely above a whisper. She still works, I think, even after death. No one slept for the rest of the night. In the daylight, the house looked normal again. Old wood, peeling paint, faint coffee scent. But the calm felt like a thin curtain hiding something that would never truly leave. Before leaving, Miss Carter glanced once more at the maid's photograph. This time, the eyes in the picture seemed to carry a new expression, as if greeting her or warning her. And as their car pulled away, a final thought clung to her. If the maid has been working for 100 years, does she ever plan to stop?